Yeah, so I'm a blockchain consultant at Fifth9. Fifth9 also work in the RPA machine learning space. So, oh yeah, where's the mic? Can everybody hear me? If I speak like this, can people hear the back?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello. Okay, that's working. Yeah, so I'm interested in machine learning as well. So these are some of the other companies I've consulted for and worked for in the blockchain space. So I was lucky to be in Accenture when they first started getting into blockchain. So I helped start up their blockchain community of practice there globally, and now I've moved on to a startup and experiencing startup life. So the aims of this talk, I want to highlight that blockchain doesn't exist on its own. This is especially true in an enterprise context. So we always have physical assets in the real world that we're trying to represent on the blockchain. And we always have the data side and the data security, mainly the private keys, which has already come up in today's talk. So how I'm going to explain this, I'm going to give a supply chain blockchain example just to create a bit of enterprise context. Then I'm going to go into the physical problems, so the moving of items to the supply chain. Then I'll touch on some of the data problems. So what's the new age way of securing your private keys? So when I was working at Accenture, a large defense company approached us with a problem statement. The Ministry of Defense had aircraft carriers that would need to be returned to port because of faulty radar systems. These radar systems were breaking because of single diodes that were counterfeit. Now, if you can imagine in a supply chain to create something like an aircraft carrier, there are at least 20 tiers. That's 20 different people building up these components. When you only have databases, each person only knows what's come into them and what's gone out of them. That means there were two major problems. First of all, this aircraft carrier was no longer in service. Second of all, it cost them millions of pounds to be able to identify through the supply chain who had originally supplied that counterfeit diode. So blockchain was a clear use case here because blockchain allows everybody to be able to share information. Specifically, we actually used Hyperledger in this case because of the ability to create a permission blockchain and create certain channels. For example, Thales doesn't want Rolls-Royce to know how much is just paid for a contract. So certain things need to stay confidential. However, there's a massive advantage if Thales can quickly identify who's supplying these counterfeit goods and then blacklist them. Then somebody like Rolls-Royce can come and see who's been blacklisted, and that's all in an effort to reduce the amount of counterfeit goods that exist in our aerospace industry. So that's the example I'm going to use as I go throughout the talk to give some context. You can see here how throughout the supply chain it's all linked through the blockchain. So now the physical side of things, what do I mean by physical? Well, when supplier A sends something to supplier B, how does it work at the moment? They scan a barcode, leaves the warehouse, arrives at the next warehouse, supplier B scans a barcode, and then over the blockchain this will be updated. So that's great. There's a problem with barcodes. What does everybody love about blockchain? Well, it's immutable and it's tamper-proof. Barcodes are neither of these, and neither are QR codes. So if we're going to create a blockchain solution, and we're going to claim that we know with 100% verifiability that something has come from where we say it is, but we have a physical side of the representation of the blockchain that is weak, i.e. barcodes and QR codes, then we have a massive problem. So how could we overcome this problem? There's a blockchain version of a barcode that's been created by the company Chronicled called a crypto seal. This has blockchain attributes. So first of all, it can't be tampered with. If you remove a QR code, it's basically a sticker. If you remove the sticker from this box in the supply chain, it destroys the NFC tag inside it. So that means it's tamper-proof. It's cryptographically unique, so it's impossible to replicate, and the information on it is immutable. So some of you might be thinking, like, I don't really care about supply chains, but it's just to give an awareness of when we're creating solutions in the blockchain industry, especially enterprise space, we need to be thinking about are our claims in the blockchain being backed up by how we're setting up the physical world? Now, we've seen from a simple example, it's no longer possible to replace a box, and that would make sense if we have a box of diodes worth £1,000. Thales had a use case where they were shipping FPGA boards, their field programmable gate arrays, and they're worth thousands of pounds, so we'd have a box worth £20,000. I'm sure you're all bought on crypto seals up to now, but you can bypass them. If you've got £20,000 and you want to replace them with counterfeit goods, it's still possible to do. You could take the effort, and because of the massive reward in this case, you could bypass the crypto seal and replace the whole box. People might have seen it in war dogs, where they replace all the Chinese ammunition, they take out the Chinese box, they put it in American bags and say that it's American ammunition. That's what happens in our aerospace industry, and that could still happen with crypto seals to an extent. So how can we make sure that the FPGA boards in this case that leave supplier A and eventually reach our aircraft carriers are the same ones? Again, stay with me, no one cares about FPGA boards, but this is more about having a creative mind on identifying an individual object. Thales have been working on a fingerprinting for FPGA boards. When an FPGA board is made, the silicon is folded. These ripples in the silicon create minute microscopic details. This means that if you run a current through the FPGA board, you're able to get a fingerprint out of it. So just like our fingerprints don't affect how we can operate, the fingerprints of the FPGA boards don't affect their functionality, but you can still use them to individually identify them. Therefore, when we created this end-to-end supply chain solution, we were able to secure with crypto seals as a first line of defense. And then the second line of defense to enable our blockchain, we uniquely identified the FPGA boards. This is now being rolled out. Thales, Rolls-Royce, and BAE Systems are taking this blockchain to production. It was actually shown at the Farnborough Air Show recently. So what are some other ways? Some of you might be here working with different things. Let's take another company. So De Beers, the world's largest supplier of diamonds. They wanted to undercut Everledger. Everledger were one of the first enterprise blockchain solutions in the world. They created a blockchain solution to track diamonds. Their use case was that they wanted to stop blood diamonds across the world. De Beers, as a big supplier, knew they could come in and muscle out, but they needed to make sure that they did things that Everledger didn't. Like Thales, they have the technology and understanding of their product to add that extra layer of security to their blockchain. They use a combination of machine learning and light pattern recognition to individually identify diamonds. This means that even if they have a blockchain, somebody could come along and say, it's great that you've got a blockchain, it's immutable, but you're not backing it up in the real world. Now they have. They can shine a laser at this and they can say, this is the exact diamond that left supplier A and ended up in the ring on somebody's finger. There are lots of examples of this, and I personally believe you can uniquely identify anything. And if you're creating an enterprise blockchain solution, or you're thinking of investing in an enterprise blockchain solution, make sure they're thinking of these things. One last one I'd like to talk about is the digital world. So you might be transferring assets that are digital. Let's say we're a law firm and we want to start putting our contracts onto the blockchain. We want to make sure that the contract that is signed in 2007 isn't forged in 2011, which is affecting today's date. And this happens an enormous amount in law, because all you really need to do is pay a solicitor a certain amount of money, and if they're a bad actor, they can basically verify that the change of this document happened in the past. So there's a massive attack vector there. How can we secure that with blockchain? Well, we can create a hash of the document before we upload it to the blockchain. I don't want to go too much into hashing. I think most of you will be quite familiar, but basically create a fingerprint of a digital asset. It lines all the ones and zeros up, and it creates a fingerprint of that. Even if one single one is changed to a zero, so even if one letter is changed to a different letter in that digital contract, the hash will be completely different. This means that you can have 100% verifiability through your blockchain and through your physical asset that it hasn't changed. So we talked about the physical side of things. Now I want to go into the data. So it's great if you have a secure physical side, but like any security feature, it's only as strong as its weakest link. And what's the biggest problem in blockchain security? It's clearly private keys. And it's not surprising that it's private keys, because the only part of a blockchain that is trusted to the end user is the private key. And that's the weakest part, because humans can't be trusted to look after things. So 20 billion pounds worth of cryptocurrency has been stolen, and 2 billion pounds of cryptocurrency was lost in 2017 alone. This cryptocurrency is lost because they get a virus on their hard drive, or for example, they lose their backup key. All these things can just mean you lose everything, and because there's no third party to back it up, because we love this decentralized world, we've lost all our money. So it calls into question, what's the gold standard in the off-chain world, in the every other part of enterprise? Banks use hardware security modules to monitor incoming and outgoing transactions, and everybody here has their private keys stored on bank hardware security modules. I think the best way to split this up is, this is a picture of a hardware security module made by Thales. You have hard drives. There's a hard drive in this computer. It's a piece of hardware. This is also a hardware, but it's not a hard drive. The private keys are physically encrypted into this. So if we were to take this now and this had private keys stored on this Mac, there'd be definitely somebody here who'd be able to go home, read that hard drive, and steal the private keys. If I gave a room of 1 million people a hardware security module, 100% nobody would be able to take it home and steal the private keys off it. And that's why it's the gold standard of security. Everybody from HSBC to the Bank of England rely on these. So how can we integrate this with a blockchain? Well, if we're deploying our blockchain solution on Ethereum or Hyperledger, it's actually very easy. It takes about 15 lines of code on Hyperledger to deploy your private key to a hardware security module. So that means with 15 lines of code, it's on GitHub, it's open source, you can have world standard enterprise security for your blockchain solutions. If I'm talking to a blockchain client and we're talking about blockchain and they haven't got their private keys stored on a hardware security module, that's the first thing to do. Get them on a hardware security module. Let's get things safe. And then you can start working on use cases after that. This, however, costs £20,000, this particular model. And even for the cheapest hardware security module, secondhand, you're looking at £2,000. So that £2,000 one's still going to be thousands of times more secure than any hard drive. However, for me and you, if we have cryptocurrency, you're not going to want to go and invest in it, HSM, unless you're doing very well. Luckily now you can have cloud hardware security module contracts for £1 an hour. That means there's literally no excuse not to have enterprise grade security, and it's a red flag if a company doesn't have hardware security modules storing their private keys. The next step of this, and it's a bit more blue sky thinking, is where can we take these things from now? So I've talked about the supply chain, how blockchain can be used to secure a supply chain, that there are two major things. You need to make sure the physical assets are being secured and are being secured in a blockchain way, i.e. they're immutable and that they're tamper-proof. We have the data side of things. So let's put everything on enterprise-grade security and make sure that we're not cutting any corners. What's the next step? And I personally think it's hardware security modules are now being put onto SIM cards. And this has the potential to integrate edge computing and blockchain and enterprise-grade security. So I suppose if you're not familiar with edge computing, basically when everybody got excited about cloud, but originally everybody was getting excited about edge computing, but cloud ended up taking everything away from being distributed and putting it in one place. Edge computing is the movement to take everything from one place and start distributing it again. So it's interesting, we can see parallels between edge computing and blockchain. Now, if you have a hardware security module that is based on a SIM card, you have your private keys stored on that SIM card. and it's in an edge computer, you're starting to create the next level of distributed computing and distributed security. How long have I got left? I'm not too sure.
Let's have a look. 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah. So I'd do a bit more on, I wanted to cover this more anyway. So I think a lot of you would be quite interested in, like, why is that good to have a blockchain on the supply chain as a holistic use case? Because these bad actors can still do what they want. We can't ever stop them doing what they want, and the blockchain is never actually solving that. And I think that's often where the misconception comes with blockchain. And I think, Laura, that came up from your talks as well. It's not a trustless environment. It's creating new trust into the environment. So this solution we created with Thales, all it really does is create transparency throughout the blockchain and throughout the supply chain. That means that in the future, when somebody is a bad actor, we can easily blacklist them. At the moment, because of opacity, it's impossible to blacklist people. It's also very difficult to communicate between different suppliers and different companies, bad actors.
Do you want to perhaps,
yeah, so that's basically, yeah, I think that's it. So,
awesome.
Any questions?
Let's
do that.
Yeah.
I'll go to the last slide, actually.
Last one, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nearly.
That's if you scan that QR code, you can add me on LinkedIn.
Okay, guys. So let's see. First question, man in front. Here we go.
Hi, how you doing? Just going back to the De Beers example you gave.
Yeah.
So I get the supply chain example because you've got multiple actors and there's a lack of opacity between the different supply chain components, which sort of lends itself to decentralization. I think one of the things you missed out when you talked about blockchain being immutable, the fundamental thing is it's decentralized. So in the case of De Beers, I get the fact that you can fingerprint the diamond, that all makes a lot of sense. Why do you need a blockchain? Why not just have a centralized authority in a database?
The idea is that, so if De Beers says that diamond on your ring is not a blood diamond, you can trust De Beers, and that can happen at the moment, but it's only when you have De Beers and you have the other 5 major suppliers all sharing and verifying the same information that you can really get that accountability. So it makes it impossible for De Beers to lie and to say, yeah, this diamond isn't a blood diamond.
But does it though? Because if it's a permission blockchain and if you've got 5 essentially very large companies, it's very easy for them to form a cartel, which is what they've done in the past, right? And so whether you have a blockchain or whether you have a centralized oracle, I'm not convinced in that it's going to solve the problem of trust.
So I think it's less it's not impossible, but it's less likely that those 5 are going to get together and convene to do that than it is that one of them is just going to say, yeah, I don't supply blood diamonds, because nobody says they supply blood diamonds at the moment. De Beers aren't saying we're trying to stop blood diamonds, because they'd never say that, but that's the implication. Do you know what I mean? That nobody's ever claiming to supply blood diamonds, but blood diamonds are getting into the industry. Just like the Thales would never sell an aircraft carrier to the Ministry of Defence and say, yeah, 10% of those parts are counterfeit. But we know 100%, 10% of those parts are counterfeit. So it's a bit of publicity balance. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's just I'm less convinced of the use case for blockchain in that environment. Whereas I can see it much more clearly when you've got 20, 30 different suppliers, a whole bunch of people. It just makes more sense to decentralize.
So with De Beers, don't forget, it's not just the suppliers. So you've got the shops who actually sell them. Right, you've got the mines.
But they're not authentic. I mean, the authentication is done at a central point, right? When the diamond comes out of the mine.
Yeah, but somebody who's the shops themselves want to authenticate the diamonds as well. So the idea is you have an app, and everybody's becoming much more aware of the environment. So it's becoming good for customers to be able to see where that diamond come from.
But why not just use an example? So why not just use the land registry is a good case. When I buy a house, I don't need it on the blockchain. I go to the land registry and see. And
that's a great example. So yeah, we're lucky in the UK where it's just based in the UK. We can trust the inland registry. If you go to African countries, the inland registry there is not trusted, and there's a massive problem with that.
Which is a good example, which is a good use case for blockchain.
Exactly.
In those countries.
Exactly. But with a diamond supply chain, that does cross countries and continents. So you can kind of see like there is mistrust, just like there's mistrust in the aerospace supply chain.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the same opinion that private blockchains are databases, but it's just me. So basically, Andreas Antonopoulos had this talk, and he said that a public blockchain is basically an organism which has an immune system. So whenever there's something new in terms of hacking, you know, in a couple of minutes, this whole organism will survive and will become stronger. Whereas a private blockchain, it doesn't have that immune system, because all those nodes that you know a company controls, they are behind a firewall. Most of the times they are in the cloud, usually in the same company like Microsoft Azure, and they don't spend the time to update the nodes because they have the approach, if it's working, don't break it.
What do you mean by update the nodes?
Like, let's say, if you have the Ethereum client, for example, let's say there's a problem with the client where you can create some transactions and have some memory leakage and just crash all the computers. So it happened in Ethereum with the gas attack. So something like that, if it happens on Ethereum, you have multiple nodes, you have parity, you have gas, and so on. If it happens in a private blockchain, I'm sure people will be too lazy to upgrade the nodes to solve the problem. So therefore, my point is, a private blockchain it's worse than a public blockchain for that reason.
Well, there's a lot of permissioned blockchains now. So you've got Gospel, Hyperledger, Corda. I mean, they're BFT, so it's not for the end user to decide. Like I said, if they're storing their private keys and their private key gets stolen or lost, like that's their problem. But in terms of consensus, that's built by R3, Hyperledger, and Gospel. So I don't feel like it's up to the end user to decide how secure the consensus algorithm is.
Okay.
Hello, good evening. I'd like to talk about the physical and the data connection. So you're saying that you're using some kind of crypto seal to make this physical thing tamper resistant.
Yeah.
How well does this scale? For example, if you're talking about the diamond, perhaps you can identify each one of them, maybe they're going separately. If you're talking about very minute things that are created in big quantities, can you actually register all of them and actually store all of them in private?
Great point. So we had a similar one actually. So he's basically saying it's good for high value items that are infrequent, but what about very frequent low value items? And I think liquids and waste materials are probably the best example of that, because a liquid can be divided as many times as you need. So it's practically infinite. We actually had a similar use case with creating a decentralized marketplace for waste materials. What we actually used to identify the waste materials was not something we stick on, but a handheld molecular scanner. So SCIO have created the world's first handheld molecular scanner. Basically, if I had any waste material or pharmaceutical good here now, I could scan that with the molecular scanner, and that would give me a fingerprint that would be uniquely identifiable for that part of the liquid. And it would also give me all the properties of that liquid. So I'm going to use milk as an example, but I don't think milk's a good use case. Probably pharmaceuticals are a much better use case, but it would give you the protein, it would give you the carbohydrates, and it would give you a unique identifier. And if you scanned a bottle of milk next to it, it wouldn't match. So I agree. I don't think you should put crypto seals on milk or low value items. I think they cost about 20p each. So they will go down in price, but at the moment it's just ridiculous to do that. I 100% agree with you. But there are other ways to get around that, and that's why I wanted to give the example of FPGA and hashing. Hashing is completely free. There are other ways to get around those low value items.
Do you think, for example, that we could get a cluster of things, get a container of all of those things and actually seal the container, make it in any way secure? I mean, can you, for example, have a technology where you would scan into a certain direction and identify everything in there, every individual in there?
I think, that's a great technology. And I think if you had that use case and you needed to do that, and you could find somebody who could scan a whole bunch of things and create a unique identifier for them. That's brilliant. That's exactly the type of creativity and thinking you need to be able to create great enterprise blockchain solutions.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to hold. Anyone else? Any other questions? All the way at the back. Right, come all the way back.
Pardon?
Hi, you mentioned before that SIMs are getting more capable
Yeah.
with private key management. Could
Yeah.
you just tell us a bit more about that? Is that like as capable as a secure element, or can it just sign? What can SIMs do now?
Yeah, so Amazon secured a patent, I think 3 years ago, for having this hardware security module, enterprise grade level security, and migrating it onto a SIM card. So even if we have that SIM card, we wouldn't be able to read the private keys off it. So yeah, that's how things are going. Things are becoming smaller, as in any industry, and it might actually be the case now where we're moving away from hardware security modules being in a cloud infrastructure to a decentralized SIM management process, and then that brings into Internet of Things, which is one of the clients we work with. Vodafone are the world leader in Internet of Things, and that's going to maybe even push more into the IoT space rather than the blockchain space. So I think the further we get down this, the more all these emerging technologies just kind of become one.
So is it practical? Can you like sign a transaction,
Not
an Ethereum transaction on a SIM card?
So as far as I've seen, I did research it before the talk, I can't find any people who are using hardware security modules on SIMs in any production level solution at the moment. So maybe it's happening somewhere in a lab, but I can't find any information that it's happening on a large scale.
Okay, guys, one more question then. Here we go. You guys have already asked a question. Anyone that's not asked a question yet?
I think this gentleman just asked one, was it?
Yeah.
Here we go.
All right, so I guess I agree with the gentleman over there when he said kind of private blockchains are worse than databases or just like databases.
Okay.
But my question is, why do we keep going to private blockchain? I mean, I don't know if this has been done yet, but my question is why can't we create some kind of like second layer or even something more fundamental where you have the data stored? Because blockchain is not only about transaction, but you could also have data. If we have this data encrypted, and when you want to lose it, which is a big concern for some people, for privacy reason, why can't you destroy the private key in a way when it's done on the blockchain? In this scenario, you have all the data stored on a very large blockchain. It's encrypted. You only could read it using your private key, and it's also kind of not immutable if you need it for your own organization.
Okay. So Hyperledger have done that, where you can destroy private keys and essentially make the blockchain editable, and Accenture have painted their own version of that, mainly because of GDPR. So I think there are two basically questions there. The first one is, why is a permission blockchain better than a database? Well,
why does it exist in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. And so let's take the aerospace. Where would the database sit? Who would own the database for the aerospace example?
Sorry, what was that?
Who would own the database? Who would look after the database for the aerospace example?
So the thing is, if you have your layer 2, you look after it, and what this will enable you, even if to say the whole Ethereum network goes down, you still got your your layer 2 backed up by the nodes.
Okay, that's the second question. Let's just focus on the first one. The first one is, you can't have a centralized database in the supply chain because you have 100 different actors across every continent in the world.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the Oracle Cloud Services? Ministry of Defense don't want to do it because they're not interested. Thales aren't going to do it.
But what about the current service it operates?
Pardon?
It's not free for sure at the moment, is it?
Yeah, but you only so you need to create an incentive for people to host their own nodes. That's right. But the incentive is shared and the cost is shared between all the actors in that permission blockchain. So we did have that problem, and that was a big one. How can we make these people hold their own nodes? And for this use case, it ended up being we have to get the Ministry of Defense to pressurize people and say, listen, if you're going to start supplying things to us in 2030, we're expecting this level of accountability and transparency. So you have to host your node. And it's cheap to host a node, but you still need to create incentive. And it's not possible in this distributed example to say, right, like the Inland Registry, yeah, you look after this, because nobody wants to look after a single database that's going to hold all the information.
Key point you're making is that there's no trusted third party.
Yeah, exactly. There's no trusted third party, which is blockchain's enterprise use case in a nutshell. Thanks. I didn't want to say that because I think
there you go.
everyone.
Give a round of applause, guys.